Welcome to the Defining Racism Part 1 Lunch and Learn Forum, presented by the collaborative efforts of the ACS-START Understanding and Educating Others on Racism and Training and Resources groups. The purpose of this forum is to open dialogue and educate others in understanding, recognizing, and combating racism. This will be an interactive, forum-based two-part series. In Part 1, we will discuss race and the definition of racism. In Part 2 of the series, we will discuss the manifestations of racism. So please be on the lookout for more information on Part 2. During the forum today, we will incorporate some polls to allow us to gather information. For our agenda, we will discuss what is race, depictions of racism, the definition of racism, and give closing remarks. Before I tell you that, I'd like to give kudos to our team for doing a great job in putting this forum together. On the Understanding and Educating Others on Racism group, there's Tony, Armin, Scott, Karen, Susan, Angelica, Karen S., and Jana. For the Training and Resources team members, there's Veronica, Allison, Candace, Thomas, Olivier, Angela S., and Jana. So ACS-START is a staff-led task force formed during the racial unrest last year. For me, the formation of this task force was the beginning of me having a voice in the workplace during a time when I felt horrified at the events taking place in our nation. Just to give a brief overview of ACS-START, it is made up of 12 work groups. As the diagram depicts, the relationships between our staff-led groups and Board of Regents groups are intersecting. If you would like further information or have any questions on ACS-START, please send an email to acs-start@facs.org, and we will make sure that those messages are sent to our steering committee. Please remember, this is a safe space. You are welcome to express yourself without judgment. And also, please be mindful to conduct yourself in accordance with ACS values. As we begin this forum, no words could be more true as those of Maggie Kuhn, who says, "Speak your mind, even if your voice shakes." With no further ado, we will open this forum with poll questions moderated by Thomas Jones. Thank you.
Thank you, Kenya. Speak your mind, even if your voice shakes. That is a great quote. And there were a couple of questions that we as a group wanted to get our arms around. And we went to the Pew Research Center to kind of see what the people of the nation were feeling. And one of the pertinent questions was, how many of you believe that there is discrimination against racial and ethnic groups? And you see here, this is a poll that was taken by that organization in 2019. 80% of Black Americans and 40% of white Americans believe there is discrimination against racial and ethnic groups. Our questions continued. We wanted to know additional information as we move forward with our efforts. And the next question that we actually posed to ourselves is, do you believe that African Americans have experienced discrimination or have been treated unfairly because of their race or ethnicity? And again, with the Pew Research Center, this again was a study that was done in the beginning of 2019 of about 6,500 people, and 76% of Blacks say they have experienced discrimination or have been treated unfairly because of their race or ethnicity, at least from time to time. So these are good numbers, figuratively, good numbers to think about and how they impact your world at the same time. Without further ado, I pass this on to Veronica Bridgewaters.
Thank you, Thomas. What is race? Race is a social and political concept, not a scientific one. Even though it is true, race is a powerful political, social, and economic force. Race was and is constructed for social and political purposes. in part to divide and conquer poor and working white people from poor and working people in communities of color. When groups came from Europe, like the Irish, Italian, and Germans, they dressed and spoke differently, had different customs and religions, and they were met with racism and atrocities that we often associate with African Americans, like the Ku Klux Klan. The term white was constructed to unite certain European groups living in the United States who were fighting each other and at the same time were a numerical minority in comparison to the numbers of African slaves and Native peoples. In order to justify the idea of a white race, every institution in this country was and is used to prove that race exists, and to promote the idea that the white race is at the top of the racial hierarchy, and that all other races are below, with the Black race on the bottom. All institutions were and are used to promote the idea of white supremacy. All European immigrants did not and do not become white at the same time. Becoming white involves giving up parts of your original culture in order to gain the advantages and privileges of belonging to the white group. As Audre Lorde said, it is not our differences that divide us. It is our inability to recognize, accept, and celebrate those differences. Next, we're going to show you a few images from the last 60 years. Little Rock, 9. 60 years ago, 9 teens braved violent protests to attend school after the Supreme Court outlawed segregation. As you look at these images, what do you see? How do they make you feel? 1960, Ruby Bridges, the first African-American child to desegregate the all-white William Frantz Elementary School in Louisiana during the New Orleans school desegregation crisis on November 14, 1960. Now, 2020. Someone placed a black bearskin and a cardboard sign that read, "From here to the lake, Black lives don't matter," at the entrance to the Rocky Mountain National Park. Again, 2020. The Proud Boys, a far-right neo-fascist, all-male organization, burned a Black Lives Matter sign in front of the Asbury United Methodist Church, a historically Black congregation, during a December rally in Washington, D.C. And now I present Angelica Rigo.
Thank you, Veronica. We have defined race. Now, as we transition into defining racism, the words of James Baldwin speak to the beginning of our journey. For our part, he said, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. For our part, we must be willing to face and define our discomfort in order to have hope of facilitating positive, productive change. To that end, we want to hear from you again through our next poll. If asked, how comfortable would you feel providing a definition of racism? We'll give the group a few moments to answer. There is no right or wrong answer. Our poll shows that people are overwhelmingly somewhat comfortable with defining racism. In the ACS-START group, we recognize that everyone is in various stages of awareness when it comes to engaging in discussions about racism. This led to a strong feeling that we need to ground our work around a common definition of racism, and this will help us remain focused on creating and sustaining groups, resources, and behaviors that will perpetuate a culture of anti-racism at ACS. If you were to look up the definition of racism, you would find a variety of definitions, from Wikipedia to Anti-Defamation League to Britannica to Merriam-Webster. The list goes on. Although the definitions may vary, there are common themes through each that don't change. Themes like superiority, rank, hierarchy, oppression, division, and marginalization. In crafting a definition for our organization to build its work around, we felt it was important to acknowledge these themes head on and to also acknowledge the systemic effect of racism on marginalized communities, especially the Black community. And by systemic, I mean the procedures and processes that have been in place that disadvantage people of color, whether that be in employment, healthcare, education, housing, or other systems or structures. Here is the definition of racism that our group has come to consensus on, and the definition that we're using to help inform our anti-racism work. So racism as defined here is the marginalization and/or oppression of people of color based on a socially constructed racial hierarchy that privileges white people. Racism involves one group having the power to carry out systematic discrimination through the institutional policies and practices of the society and by shaping the cultural beliefs and values that support those racist policies and practices. We're going to briefly pause and let you review and absorb the definition for a moment. Now that you have seen the definition of racism, we'd like to hear from you again. For our next poll, we would like to know, do you agree with this definition of racism? Yes, no, still unsure? It seems the group is 50-50 on the definition, which is okay. We're still learning. Toni Morrison once stated that the very serious function of racism is distraction. It keeps you from doing your work. It keeps you explaining over and over again your reason for being. The simplicity and complexity of this quote is powerful, and I agree with the sentiment. However, I would go a step further and argue that racism is more than a distraction. When you have a social construct, which is what race and racism is, that has survived over 400 years, distraction doesn't fully capture the effects felt by people of color, especially within the Black community. That said, I think the important thing is for us to know that we have the power to educate ourselves as we're doing now and take action to disrupt the cycle and be the change. As you may have noticed, this is part one of a series of learning forums we will hold on racism. The struggle was, how do you do justice to a subject like this in less than an hour? This is a big, complex, and challenging topic, so we wanted to start from the beginning by defining race and racism and then build our engagement with you from there. In part two of this series, we will explore the manifestations of racism, specifically the various ways racism presents itself. We will discuss prejudice and how racism gives rise to preconceived opinions about groups of people which are not based on actual experience, oppression and how racism has reinforced systematic and social oppression, resulting in unequal treatment and denied access to education, professional, and economic opportunities for Black people and other marginalized groups. We will delve into white supremacy, the ideology that white people and the ideas, thoughts, beliefs, and actions of white people are superior to people of color and their ideas, thoughts, beliefs, and actions, and how that has lent itself to the establishment of over 800 hate groups in this country. We will explore microaggressions, which are those brief, seemingly normal comments that appear harmless to some, but transmit negative and harmful messages to minority groups. We will also, and most importantly, discuss the historical impact of laws and policies on racism and how laws and policies continue to have negative social, economic, and emotional effects on people of color. The next forum will incorporate examples and continued opportunities for interaction. As participants today, we hope you will join us. Now, I would like to pass it on to Kenya Posley to close us out.
Thank you, Angelica. So we discussed the concept of race and defined racism. Based on these discussions, we would like to know, what do you plan to do to further your knowledge on racism? Some of our suggestions include look up suggested readings, attend more forums, get involved with ACS-START. If you have other suggestions, please send us an email at acs-start@facs.org. Thank you for participating in part one of the Defining Racism Forum. Enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you.